3 hours after saying "I do," she expected to be in the arms of her new husband, a preacher admired by the entire congregation, a man her mother praised as God-sent, and a husband she believed would lead a home with faith, dignity, and love. But instead of romance, she walked into a scene no bride is prepared for. Her husband, her newlywed, standing in their suite wearing diapers. And when he turned around, she saw something so shocking, so medically disturbing, that her brain needed seconds to understand what her eyes were seeing. His anal sphincter was gone. Not injured. Not temporarily weak. Gone. The result of years of secret gay sexual activity he had hidden from her, from the church, and from everyone who ever believed his holy image. And when he removed the diaper to explain himself, what she saw made her do the unthinkable. A chain reaction of events that would lead to murder, expose a church-wide cover-up, and reveal that the preacher she married was not just deceiving her. He was living a double life built on trauma, addiction, and lies. This is the story of how a marriage built on false prophecy, sexual secrecy, and religious manipulation collapsed before it even began, and how far a man of God was willing to go to protect the reputation he worshipped more than the God he preached about. Welcome to True Crime Story HQ. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe. Reverend Charles Whitmore wasn't just another preacher. He was the rising star of Cornerstone Faith Ministries, a mega-church in Atlanta with over 5,000 members. Every Sunday, his voice filled the sanctuary with sermons about purity, faithfulness, and living a life that honored God. People didn't just listen to Charles, they believed him. They trusted him. They saw him as a man who walked the path he preached about. Charles didn't start at the top. He began his ministry as a youth pastor at a small church on the south side of Atlanta. He was 23 years old, fresh out of Bible college, and hungry to make a difference. The young people loved him. He had a way of connecting with teenagers who felt lost, kids who came from broken homes and needed someone to believe in them. Charles would stay late after youth group meetings, listening to their problems, praying with them, giving them hope. Word spread quickly. Parents started talking about the young pastor who was changing their children's lives. Within a year, the youth group had tripled in size. Charles became known as someone with a gift, someone anointed for ministry. When the senior pastor of Cornerstone Faith Ministries heard about him, he offered Charles a position as an associate pastor. Charles accepted without hesitation. At Cornerstone, Charles's influence grew rapidly. He was assigned to preach one Sunday a month, and every time he stepped into the pulpit, the sanctuary felt electric. His sermons were passionate, convicting, and filled with scripture. He preached about holiness, about living above reproach, about being examples to a world that desperately needed God. The congregation responded with amens and applause. Charles became the face of the next generation of leadership. Charles had a way of making everyone feel seen. After services, he would stay for hours, shaking hands, praying with families, offering words of encouragement to anyone who needed them. Mothers pointed him out to their daughters. "That's the kind of man you marry," they would say. Charles was single, devoted to ministry, and seemingly untouchable by the sins that dragged down so many other men in positions of power. The senior pastor, Reverend Leonard Hayes, took Charles under his wing. Leonard saw something special in Charles, a charisma that couldn't be taught, a natural ability to command attention and inspire devotion. Leonard mentored Charles, teaching him not just how to preach, but how to navigate church politics, how to build influence, how to protect his reputation. Leonard would often say, "In ministry, perception is everything. People need to believe in you, Charles. Never give them a reason to doubt." Charles absorbed every lesson. He was strategic about his image. He dressed impeccably, always in tailored suits and crisp shirts. He was careful about who he associated with, making sure he was seen with the right people, the elders, the wealthy donors, the respected families. He volunteered for every high-profile church event. He led mission trips. He spoke at conferences. By the time Charles turned 30, he was the most popular preacher at Cornerstone Faith Ministries. But behind the scenes, something was shifting. By the time Charles reached his late 20s, questions began to surface. Not loud ones at first, just whispers in the church hallways. "Why hasn't Charles settled down yet?" some of the older women would ask. "He's handsome, successful, anointed. What's he waiting for?" The whispers grew a bit louder. "Maybe he's waiting on God," someone would offer. But others weren't so sure. Then the whispers turned into something else. Rumors. Uncomfortable ones. People started noticing things. Charles spent a lot of time with certain male members of the church. Deacon Russell in particular. They would have meetings that went late into the night, long after everyone else had gone home. Prayer sessions behind closed doors that no one else was invited to. Some people saw Charles and Russell leaving the church together, getting into the same car, driving off in directions that didn't make sense. One Sunday after service, Sister Beverly, one of the older members of the congregation, pulled her friend aside. "Something's not right with Charles," she whispered. "I saw him and Russell coming out of the church office at midnight last week. What kind of meeting lasts until midnight?" Her friend looked horrified. "Beverly, you better watch your mouth. That's a man of God you're talking about. You can't go around spreading gossip like that." "I'm not gossiping," Beverly insisted. "I'm just saying what I saw." "Well, what you saw doesn't mean anything," her friend snapped. "Maybe they were praying. Maybe they were counseling someone. You don't know what was going on, so you need to keep your suspicions to yourself." But Beverly wasn't convinced. "I'm just saying it's strange. That's all." "Strange doesn't mean sinful," her friend said firmly. "And you need to be careful about planting seeds of doubt about a man who has done nothing but serve this church faithfully. How dare you say something like that about him?" Beverly backed down, but she wasn't the only one with suspicions. A few of the deacons had started whispering among themselves. One of them, Deacon Howard, brought it up during a private meeting. "I don't want to accuse anyone of anything," he said carefully. "But has anyone else noticed that Charles doesn't seem interested in women? At all? Every single woman in this church has tried to get his attention, and he doesn't give any of them the time of day." Another deacon nodded slowly. "I've noticed, but maybe he's just focused on ministry. Some men are called to be single." "For this long?" Howard pressed. "He's 32 years old. No dates, no relationships, nothing. And then there's the way he is with certain men. I'm not saying anything definite, but it makes you wonder." "You better be careful," another deacon warned. "If you start spreading rumors like that without proof, you could destroy that man's life. And if you're wrong, you'll have to answer to God for it." "I'm not spreading rumors," Howard defended. "I'm just making an observation." "Observations can be just as damaging as rumors," the other deacon shot back. "Charles has done nothing but build this church up. Membership has doubled since he started preaching regularly. Offerings are at an all-time high. People are getting saved every week. You want to tear that down because of some suspicion you can't even prove." The conversation ended there, but the questions didn't. And the questions weren't just coming from the suspicious ones. Even Charles's supporters were starting to ask, why wasn't he married? Why didn't he date? Why did he always deflect when people tried to set him up? But every time someone questioned Charles's personal life, someone else would rush to his defense. "Leave that man alone," they would say. "He's busy doing God's work." Not everyone needs to be married to be fulfilled. Look at the Apostle Paul. He was single, and he changed the world. "But Paul said it was a gift," someone would counter. And Charles has never said he has the gift of singleness. He just avoids the topic altogether. "Because it's none of our business," the defenders would snap. "His relationship status has nothing to do with his ability to preach the gospel. We should be grateful we have a pastor who isn't caught up in scandals like so many others. Charles is focused on ministry, and that's exactly what he should be doing." And so the church remained divided. Some people believed the rumors. Others refused to entertain them. But everyone was watching. Everyone was paying attention. And Charles could feel it. Charles could feel the shift in how people looked at him. The smiles were still there, but so were the glances that lingered a second too long. The elders started asking when he planned to get married. His mother called more often, hinting that it was time for him to find a wife. The pressure mounted from every direction. But Charles kept pushing forward. He focused on his work, on his preaching, on building his reputation. He refused to let the whispers distract him. The church continued to grow under his influence. New members joined every week, many of them coming specifically to hear Charles preach. The offering plates were fuller than ever. Leonard Hayes was pleased. "You're doing great work, Charles," Leonard would say. "Just keep doing what you're doing." And Charles did. He preached with even more passion. He led even more ministries. He became even more visible, even more admired. The church expanded, building a new wing to accommodate the growing congregation. Charles was named lead associate pastor, a position that put him directly in line to take over when Leonard eventually retired. Everything was going according to plan. Charles was on top of the world. His career was thriving. His influence was growing. His future was secure. Despite the whispers, despite the rumors, despite the questions, Charles had managed to maintain his position. He was still the golden boy of Cornerstone Faith Ministries. Still the preacher everyone wanted to hear. Still the man mothers pointed out as the ideal husband. But Charles knew something they didn't. He knew the whispers were getting louder. He knew the questions were becoming harder to ignore. He knew that sooner or later, someone would start digging deeper, and if they did, everything he had built would come crashing down. Charles needed a solution. He needed something definitive, something that would silence the rumors once and for all. He needed proof that he was exactly who he claimed to be, a heterosexual man of God with nothing to hide. He needed to get married. And then one Sunday morning, everything changed. It was a regular service, nothing special. The choir was singing. The congregation was worshiping. Charles was preparing to preach. He was standing near the pulpit, reviewing his notes, when he looked up and saw her. Kate Brandon. She wasn't new to the church. She had been attending Cornerstone for years, sitting quietly in the middle section. Charles had seen her before, of course, but he had never really noticed her. She was just another face in the crowd, another member of the congregation. But on that Sunday, something was different. Maybe it was the desperation Charles was feeling. Maybe it was the mounting pressure from every side. Maybe it was the realization that time was running out. Charles couldn't stop staring at her. His mind started working. Was it love at first sight, or was it something far more dangerous? We will find out very soon. But before you continue this story, take a second to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and share it with someone who needs to hear the truth. Stories like this don't reach people without your support. Now, let's keep going. The truth was, Charles Whitmore didn't choose Kate Brandon out of love. He chose her because she was useful. Her parents' devotion to the church made her the perfect target. Their belief that only a man of God could protect their daughter meant they wouldn't question his motives. And Kate, raised to trust spiritual authority, wouldn't challenge a man who claimed God had spoken to him. Charles knew exactly what he was doing. The proposal wasn't spontaneous. It was strategic. The vision he claimed to have wasn't divine. It was fabricated. Every word he spoke to Kate was designed to manipulate her into saying yes before she had time to think. 2 weeks after their first conversation, Charles proposed. Kate was still processing the fact that this man she barely knew believed they were destined to marry. She wanted more time. She wanted to understand who Charles really was. But every time she expressed hesitation, Charles had an answer ready. "I know this feels fast," he said. "But when God reveals his plan, delay is disobedience. I've prayed about this for months. The Holy Spirit confirmed it over and over. You are my wife." Kate didn't know how to argue with that. How do you tell a preacher that God might be wrong? Kate's parents made the decision easier or harder, depending on how you looked at it. When she told them about the proposal, Sylvia cried, "This is a miracle, Kate. Do you know how many women would kill to marry a man like Charles?" Harold was just as enthusiastic. "You're not going to find better than this. A preacher who hears from God. That's a gift." Kate wanted to share their excitement. She wanted to believe this was the blessing everyone said it was. But something in her gut kept screaming that this wasn't right. she ignored it. She told herself she was being paranoid. She convinced herself that her doubts were just fear of the unknown. The engagement was set for 2 months. Charles insisted on the short timeline. "Long engagements don't make marriages stronger," he said. "Look at what happened to Sister Jane. She and Collins dated for 5 years. They had a huge wedding. Everyone thought they were perfect. And they divorced 4 months later. Time doesn't guarantee success. Obedience to God does." Kate's parents agreed. "When you know," Sylvia said. "And Charles knows. That's all that matters." But during those 2 months, Kate barely saw her fiancé. She tried to plan dates, to spend time getting to know the man she was about to marry. But Charles was always busy. "I have a deacon's meeting tonight," he would say. Or, "I'm leading a prayer session." Or, "One of the church members is going through a crisis, and I need to be there for them." Kate understood that being a preacher meant Charles had responsibilities, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that he was avoiding her. When they did see each other, their conversations were surface level. They talked about the wedding, about the church, about logistics. They never talked about their hopes, their fears, their pasts. Kate tried to bring up deeper topics, but Charles would steer the conversation back to something safe. "We'll have plenty of time to talk after the wedding," he would say. "Right now, we just need to focus on getting through this process." Kate told herself that was normal. She told herself that once they were married, once the pressure of planning a wedding was over, things would be different. They would have time to really know each other. They would build the life everyone said they were destined to have. The wedding day came faster than Kate expected. She stood in the bridal suite, looking at herself in the mirror. Her dress was beautiful. Her hair and makeup were perfect. But when she looked into her own eyes, she saw fear. Not the normal nerves of a bride, something deeper. Something that felt like a warning. Her mother walked in and wrapped her arms around Kate. "You look stunning," Sylvia said. "I'm so proud of you." Kate tried to smile. "Mom, do you think we're moving too fast?" Sylvia pulled back and looked at her daughter with a mixture of concern and conviction. "Kate, this is not the time for cold feet. Charles is a man of God. He prayed about this. Your father and I have prayed about this. This is God's will." Kate nodded. She didn't say what she was really thinking. She didn't say that she felt like she was walking into something she couldn't escape from. She didn't say that every instinct in her body was telling her to run. She just nodded and let her mother lead her out of the room. The ceremony was beautiful. The church was packed with people who loved Charles, who admired him, who believed he was everything a man of God should be. Kate walked down the aisle on her father's arm. She saw Charles standing at the altar, smiling at her. She saw the congregation smiling too. Everyone looked so happy. Everyone looked so convinced that this was right. Kate said her vows. Charles said his. They exchanged rings. The pastor pronounced them husband and wife. The church erupted in applause. Kate and Charles kissed, and for a moment, Kate tried to believe that everything was going to be okay. The reception was full of joy. People danced, ate, celebrated. Kate's parents couldn't stop smiling. "This is the happiest day of my life," Sylvia kept saying. Charles played his role perfectly. He was charming, gracious, everything a groom should be. But Kate noticed something. He seemed distracted. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He kept glancing at his watch, like he was waiting for something. An hour into the reception, Charles leaned over and whispered in Kate's ear, "I need to go upstairs for a minute. I'll be right back." Kate nodded. She didn't think much of it. Maybe he needed a break from the crowd. Maybe he just needed a moment to himself. But 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Then 45. Kate started to worry. She excused herself from the table and went upstairs to their honeymoon suite. She knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. She tried the handle, and the door opened. What Kate saw when she walked into that room would haunt her for the rest of her life. Kate stepped into the suite and froze. Charles was standing in the middle of the room, and he wasn't wearing the tuxedo he'd had on downstairs. He was wearing adult diapers. Just diapers. Nothing else. His back was turned to her, and for a second, Kate's brain couldn't process what she was seeing. This didn't make sense. This wasn't something she could explain. Then Charles heard her gasp. He turned around and Kate saw his face. Panic, shame, something close to terror. But that wasn't what made her stomach drop. When he turned, she saw the damage. His body showed signs of severe trauma, physical destruction that looked impossible. His anal area was completely open, loose, destroyed in a way that Kate didn't have words for. She couldn't speak. She couldn't move. Her mind was trying to catch up with what her eyes were seeing, but nothing made sense. This was her husband. This was the man she had just married. This was supposed to be their wedding night. And instead, she was standing in a honeymoon suite staring at something she could never unsee. Charles started talking, his words coming out in a rush. "Kate, I can explain. Please, just let me explain." But Kate still couldn't say anything. She felt like she was drowning, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Charles took a step toward her, and she took a step back. "I was going to tell you," he said. "I just didn't know how. I didn't know when." Kate finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What is this? What happened to you?" Charles sat down on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He looked broken, but Kate couldn't feel sympathy. She couldn't feel anything except the overwhelming need to understand what was happening. "When I was 18, Charles began, I went to visit my uncle. He was someone our family trusted, someone I thought I could trust." Charles paused, and Kate could see him struggling to get the words out. "He raped me. For 3 days. He damaged me. Physically. Permanently. The doctors told me I would need surgery to fix it, but I couldn't afford it. So I've been wearing these ever since." He gestured to the diaper. "I didn't want you to find out like this. I was going to tell you, I swear." Kate felt a wave of nausea. This was horrible. What happened to Charles was horrible, but something about his story didn't add up. She looked at the damage again, and her instincts told her this wasn't just from one incident years ago. This looked recent. This looked ongoing. "Charles," she said slowly, "this isn't just from when you were 18, is it?" Charles's face went pale. He didn't answer, and that silence told Kate everything she needed to know. "Tell me the truth," Kate said, her voice getting stronger. "All of it." Charles looked up at her, and she could see him weighing his options. He could keep lying, or he could come clean. Finally, he chose the latter. "It didn't stop after my uncle," he said quietly. "What he did to me, it messed me up. Psychologically. I became addicted to it. I started seeking out relationships with men. I couldn't stop. I tried, but I couldn't." Kate felt like the floor was falling out from under her. "You're gay," she said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know what I am," Charles said. "I just know I couldn't control it." And then people started talking. People at the church started asking questions, noticing things. I was terrified. If the truth came out, I would lose everything. My position, my reputation, my career. So I decided the only way to make it stop was to get married. Kate's brain was screaming at her to leave, but she couldn't move. "You married me to cover up your secret," she said. Charles looked at her with something close to desperation. "I thought if I married you, the rumors would stop. I thought I could make this work. I thought—" "You thought you could use me," Kate interrupted. Her voice was shaking now, but not from fear. From rage. "You didn't marry me because you loved me. You didn't marry me because God told you to. You married me because you needed a disguise." Charles didn't deny it. He just sat there staring at the floor. "The vision," Kate said. "The prophecy. The Holy Spirit telling you I was your wife. That was all a lie." Charles nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Kate felt something break inside her. Not her heart. That would imply she had loved him. What broke was her trust, her faith, her belief that the people she had been taught to respect were actually worthy of that respect. She had been manipulated. She had been used. She had been lied to by a man who stood in a pulpit every Sunday and told other people how to live. "I need to leave," Kate said. She turned toward the door, but Charles stood up. "Kate, please. We can work through this. We can figure it out." Kate spun around, and the look on her face stopped Charles in his tracks. "Work through this?" she said. "You lied to me. You manipulated me. You used my parents' faith against them. You used God's name to trick me into marrying you. And you did it all to protect yourself." Charles opened his mouth to respond, but Kate cut him off. "Don't call me. Don't come looking for me. We're done." She walked out of the suite, out of the hotel, and disappeared into the night. She didn't go home. She didn't call her parents. She just drove. For 2 days, no one knew where she was. And while Kate was trying to process the fact that her entire marriage was a lie, Charles was about to make a decision that would change everything. Kate didn't go home for 2 days. She checked into a small motel on the outskirts of town, paid cash, and turned off her phone. She needed time to think, time to process what had just happened. Her parents were probably worried sick, but she couldn't face them yet. She couldn't face anyone. She spent those 2 days replaying everything in her mind. The proposal, the rushed engagement, the way Charles had always seemed distracted, always seemed like he was performing rather than being present. The signs had been there, but she had ignored them. She had let her parents' excitement and Charles's manipulation override her own instincts. By the 3rd day, Kate knew what she had to do. She called a lawyer and filed for divorce. The paperwork was delivered to Charles at the church, and along with it, Kate sent a message. She told him that she would never tell anyone what he had confessed to her. She would take full responsibility for the divorce. She would let people think it was her decision, her fault. His secret would remain safe. Most people would have been relieved by that offer. Most people would have taken the gift Kate was giving them and moved on. But Charles wasn't relieved. He was terrified. A preacher getting divorced less than a week after his wedding? That would raise questions. Big questions. People would want to know why. They would speculate. They would dig. And even if Kate kept her promise not to tell the truth, the rumors that Charles had worked so hard to silence would come roaring back. Why did she leave him? People would ask. What did he do? The whispers would start again, louder this time. The elders would investigate. The congregation would lose faith in him. Everything Charles had built would crumble. Charles sat in his office at the church, staring at the divorce papers. His hands were shaking. He had thought marriage would solve his problem, but now it was making everything worse. His mind became a fog. Dense, suffocating, impossible to see through. The walls of his office felt like they were closing in. The divorce papers sat on his desk like an accusation, a death sentence written in legal language. Charles couldn't think straight. He couldn't breathe properly. Every thought led to the same place: ruin, exposure, disgrace. He picked up his phone and called Kate. No answer. He called again, straight to voicemail. He called a 3rd time, then a 4th. Each time the phone rang and rang until her voicemail picked up, Charles felt his panic rising. Where was she? Why wasn't she answering? He needed to talk to her. He needed to convince her to reconsider, to give him more time, to not file those papers. By the 5th call, Charles was pacing his office. His shirt was damp with sweat. His throat felt tight. He stared at his phone, willing it to ring, willing Kate to call him back. But the phone stayed silent. He thought about calling her parents. Harold and Sylvia would know where she was. They could tell him how to reach her. But the thought of making that call made Charles feel sick. How could he call his wife's parents 2 days after the wedding and admit he didn't know where she was? What would he say? "Hello, I've lost your daughter. Do you happen to know where she might be?" The shame of it was unbearable. And worse, what if they started asking questions? What if they wanted to know what happened? What if Kate had already told them? No, calling them was out of the question. Charles couldn't risk it. He couldn't let anyone else know that his marriage had fallen apart before it even began. He tried Kate's number again. No answer. He sent a text. "Kate, please call me. We need to talk." He watched the screen, waiting for the 3 dots that would indicate she was typing a response. Nothing. The message sat there, unread. Charles set his phone down and pressed his palms against his eyes. His mind was racing but going nowhere. He realized something in that moment that made him feel even more pathetic. He didn't actually know his wife. He didn't know her friends. He didn't know who she spent time with. He didn't know where she liked to go. He had been so focused on using her to solve his problem that he had never bothered to learn anything real about her. Who could he call? Who would know where Kate was? He scrolled through his contacts, looking for anyone who might be connected to her. But there was no one. Kate was a ghost to him, a stranger he had married for convenience. And now that stranger had disappeared, and Charles had no way to find her, he felt like a fool. A desperate, trapped fool. For 2 more days, Charles existed in a state of complete disorder. He went through the motions at church, leading prayer meetings, preparing sermons, shaking hands with members who congratulated him on his marriage. But inside, he was unraveling. Every hour that passed without hearing from Kate was another hour closer to disaster. He checked his phone constantly. He called her repeatedly. He even drove past her apartment, but her car wasn't there. At night, Charles couldn't sleep. He would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind playing out worst-case scenarios. What if Kate changed her mind about staying quiet? What if she decided to tell her parents the truth? What if she went public? He imagined standing in front of the congregation while accusations flew at him from every direction. He imagined losing his position, his reputation, everything he had worked for. On the 3rd day, Charles was sitting in his office when his phone finally rang. He grabbed it so fast he nearly dropped it. Kate's name was on the screen. Relief flooded through him so powerfully that he almost cried. She had finally called back. He answered immediately. "Kate." His voice came out too eager, too desperate, but he didn't care. "What do you want, Charles?" Her voice was flat, emotionless. Charles took a breath, trying to steady himself. "Have you told anyone?" he asked. About what I told you?" Kate sighed on the other end. "No, I haven't told anyone, and I'm not going to. I already said that." "Not even your parents?" Charles pressed, needing to be absolutely sure. "Not even your friends?" Kate's irritation was clear now. "I said no, Charles. No one knows. No one will ever know. I'm taking the blame for this divorce. Your precious reputation is safe." Charles should have felt relief. He should have felt grateful that Kate was willing to protect him even after everything he had done to her. But instead, all he felt was fear. Because even with Kate's promise, the damage was done. The divorce itself would destroy him. People would ask questions he couldn't answer. The rumors would return. His career would end. "Kate, please," Charles said, his voice breaking. "Can we just talk about this? Maybe we can work something out." "There's nothing to work out," Kate interrupted. "I'm filing for divorce. The papers are already on their way to you." "It's over, Charles." "But people will ask why," Charles said, panic creeping back into his voice. "They'll want to know what happened. Even if you don't tell them the truth, they'll speculate. They'll assume things. The rumors will come back." "That's not my problem," Kate said coldly. "You should have thought about that before you lied to me, before you used me. I'm done protecting you from the consequences of your own choices." "I'm not asking you to protect me," Charles lied. "I'm just asking you to think about what this divorce will do to both of us. To your reputation, too. People will talk about you. They'll say terrible things." "Let them," Kate said. "I don't care anymore. I'm leaving this church. I'm leaving this city. I'm starting over somewhere far away from you and everyone who enabled you." Charles felt the ground shifting beneath him. She was serious. She was really going to leave. And once she did, once the divorce was finalized, His life as he knew it would be over. "Kate, please," he started, but she cut him off. "Don't call me again," she said. "We're done." The line went dead. Charles sat there holding the phone, staring at the screen. The relief he had felt when she first answered had evaporated completely. In its place was something much darker, a cold, creeping realization that Kate's mercy wasn't going to save him. He hung up the phone and sat in silence, and then a thought crept into his mind, a thought so dark that it should have horrified him. But it didn't, because Charles wasn't thinking about right or wrong anymore. He was thinking about survival. If Kate was dead, there would be no divorce. There would be no questions, just a tragic accident, a grieving widower, sympathy instead of suspicion. Charles picked up the phone again, but this time he didn't call Kate. He called someone else, someone he trusted, someone who had just as much to lose if the truth came out. He called Reverend Leonard Hayes. Leonard was more than Charles's mentor. He was more than the senior pastor of Cornerstone Faith Ministries. Leonard was Charles's lover. Their relationship had been going on for 3 years, hidden behind closed-door meetings and late-night counseling sessions. Leonard had his own secrets to protect, his own reputation to maintain. If Charles went down, Leonard would fall with him. When Charles explained the situation, Leonard listened in silence. "She's going to file for divorce," Charles said. "Even if she doesn't tell anyone the truth, the divorce itself will destroy me. People will ask why. They'll dig. They'll figure it out." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Leonard spoke, his voice calm. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll handle it." Charles felt a wave of relief wash over him. He didn't ask what Leonard meant by handle it. He didn't want to know. He just wanted the problem to go away. 3 days later, Charles called Kate again. His voice was soft, apologetic. "Kate, I know you don't want to talk to me, but please, just hear me out. Can we meet? Just to talk. I owe you that much." Kate hesitated. She didn't want to see Charles. She didn't want to hear whatever excuses he was going to make. But part of her thought maybe, just maybe, he deserved a chance to apologize face to face. "Fine," she said. "Where?" Charles suggested a restaurant on the east side of town, somewhere public, somewhere neutral. Kate agreed. They set a time for later that evening. Kate hung up and felt a strange sense of closure. Maybe this meeting would give her the ending she needed. Maybe Charles would finally take responsibility for what he had done. But what Kate didn't know was that Charles wasn't planning to show up at that restaurant. And Leonard Hayes had already set something else in motion. Something that would leave Kate fighting for her life. Kate left her apartment that evening with a strange mix of emotions. She didn't want to see Charles, but she also felt like this meeting might give her some kind of closure. Maybe he would apologize. Maybe he would finally admit that what he did was wrong. Maybe she could walk away from this conversation and truly move on. She got in her car and started driving toward the restaurant. The streets were busy, full of people heading home from work or out for dinner. Kate turned on the radio, trying to distract herself from the knot of anxiety in her stomach. She told herself this would be over soon. One conversation, and then she could put this entire nightmare behind her. She was 2 blocks away from the restaurant when she saw it. A black SUV in her rearview mirror, moving fast. Too fast. Kate glanced at it, confused. The SUV was swerving between lanes, getting closer. Kate felt a spike of fear. Something about the way it was moving didn't feel right. She pressed harder on the gas, trying to put some distance between herself and the SUV. But it kept coming. Faster now. Kate's heart started pounding. She looked around, trying to figure out what to do. Should she pull over? Should she call the police? Before she could make a decision, the SUV slammed into the side of her car. The impact was instant and brutal. Kate's car spun out of control, tires screaming against the asphalt. She tried to steer, tried to brake, but nothing worked. The world was spinning, a blur of lights and sound and terror. Her car hit a lamppost with a sickening crunch, and then everything went black. People on the street started screaming. Someone ran toward the wreckage, pulling out their phone to call 911. Others stood frozen, staring at the mangled car, and the black SUV speeding away into the night. No one got a clear look at the driver. No one could say for sure what had just happened. But everyone knew this wasn't an accident. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Paramedics pulled Kate from the wreckage, her body limp and unresponsive. There was blood everywhere. Her leg was bent at an unnatural angle. Her head had hit the window hard enough to crack the glass. The paramedics worked fast, stabilizing her as best they could before loading her into the ambulance and racing toward Grady Memorial Hospital. At the hospital, doctors swarmed around Kate. She was rushed into emergency surgery. Her injuries were severe: broken ribs, a shattered femur, internal bleeding. But the worst damage was to her spine. The impact had crushed her L3 vertebra, sending shards of bone into her spinal cord. The surgeons did everything they could, but the damage was done. Even if Kate survived, she would never walk again. Kate's parents arrived at the hospital in a panic. Sylvia was sobbing, clutching her husband's arm as they ran through the emergency room doors. A nurse directed them to the waiting area, where a doctor met them with grim news. "Your daughter is in surgery," he said. "The next few hours are critical. I need you to prepare yourselves for the possibility that she may not make it." Sylvia collapsed into a chair, her hands covering her face. Harold stood beside her, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. "What happened?" he demanded. "Who did this?" The doctor didn't have answers. All he knew was that Kate had been hit by another vehicle. The police were investigating, but so far they had no leads. For 2 days, Kate remained in a coma. Her parents stayed by her side, praying, begging God to bring their daughter back. On the 3rd day, Kate's eyes fluttered open. Sylvia gasped and grabbed her daughter's hand. "Kate? Baby, can you hear me?" Kate's lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Sylvia leaned in closer, her ear inches from Kate's mouth. "What is it, sweetheart? What are you trying to say?" Kate's voice was barely a whisper, weak and strained. "Charles, responsible..." Sylvia pulled back, her face pale. "What? Charles? Are you sure?" But before Kate could say anything else, her eyes rolled back, and she slipped into unconsciousness again. Sylvia stood there, frozen. Charles was a preacher, a man of God. How could he be responsible for this? But Kate's words were clear, and Sylvia knew her daughter wouldn't lie. Not about something like this. Sylvia turned to Harold, her voice shaking. "We need to go to the police. Now." Harold nodded, his face hard. "Let's go." At the police station, Sylvia and Harold were directed to Detective Warren Cole's office. Warren was a 15-year veteran of the Atlanta PD, known for his ability to solve cases that seemed impossible. He listened as Sylvia explained what Kate had said. Warren didn't dismiss it. He didn't tell them they were overreacting. He just nodded and said, "I'll look into it." Warren started by questioning Charles. He found him at the church, leading a midweek Bible study. Charles looked calm, almost too calm. When Warren asked where he had been the night of the accident, Charles didn't hesitate. "I was here," he said. "We had a deacons meeting. It went until 10. 20 people can confirm it." Warren checked the alibi. Every single person at the meeting confirmed Charles's story. He had been at the church the entire evening. He couldn't have been the one driving the SUV. Warren hit a wall. If Charles wasn't the driver, then who was? And why did Kate think he was responsible? Warren decided to dig deeper. He pulled surveillance footage from businesses near the accident scene. Most of the cameras didn't show much, but one gas station on the corner had a clear view of the street. Warren reviewed the footage, watching the black SUV speed past just minutes after the crash. He zoomed in on the license plate, ran it through the system. The SUV was registered to a man named Desmond Foster. Warren ran a background check. Desmond had a criminal record. Petty theft, assault, nothing major. But what caught Warren's attention was Desmond's connection to Cornerstone Faith Ministries. He was listed as a volunteer, someone who helped with church events. Warren put out a warrant for Desmond's arrest. Within hours, police picked him up at his apartment. Desmond tried to play dumb. "My car was stolen," he said. "I reported it to the police last week." But Warren wasn't buying it. He brought Desmond into the interrogation room and laid out the evidence, the surveillance footage, the license plate, the connection to Charles. Desmond's story started to crack. Warren leaned forward, his voice hard. "Kate Brandon is paralyzed because of you. She'll never walk again. You're looking at attempted murder. You want to go down for this alone? Or do you want to tell me who put you up to it?" Desmond's hands were shaking. He looked at the photos of Kate's destroyed car on the table. He looked at Warren, and then he broke. "It wasn't Charles," he said. "Charles didn't pay me. It was Leonard Hayes, the senior pastor." Warren froze. "What?" Desmond nodded, his voice rushing now. "Leonard called me. He said Charles had a problem that needed to be handled. He said if I took care of it, he'd pay me $15,000. He told me where she'd be and when. He said to make it look like an accident." Warren sat back, his mind racing. This wasn't just about Charles anymore. This was bigger. This was a conspiracy. And it went all the way to the top of the church. Desmond swallowed hard. "I've been doing some work for the church, helping with events and stuff. I owed Leonard some money from a loan he gave me last year. He said he had a way for me to pay him back and make some extra cash." Warren made notes. "What exactly did he say?" Desmond rubbed his face. "He said there was a situation that needed to be handled. He didn't give me details at first, just asked if I was willing to help. I thought he meant moving furniture or something for the church. But then he said it was more serious than that." "When did he tell you what he actually wanted?" Warren asked. Desmond looked down at his hands. "A few days later, he called me late at night and told me to meet him at the church. When I got there, he took me into his office and closed the door. That's when he told me about Kate." Warren's jaw tightened. "What did he say about her?" Desmond's voice dropped. "He said she was threatening to destroy Charles. He said she was going to ruin everything Charles had worked for, and that Charles was like a son to him. He said the only way to protect Charles in the church was to make sure Kate couldn't talk." "Did he explicitly tell you to kill her?" Warren pressed. Desmond nodded slowly. He didn't use those exact words at first. He kept saying things like, "Handle the situation and make sure she can't cause problems." But when I asked him what he meant, he got real quiet. Then he said, "She needs to disappear, permanently." I knew what he was asking. Warren felt a cold anger rising in his chest. "And you agreed?" Desmond's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want to. I swear I didn't. But Leonard said he'd give me $15,000. He said he'd also forgive the debt I owed him. Man, I've got gambling debts. I've got people threatening me. I was desperate. I thought maybe I could just scare her or something. But Leonard was clear. He wanted her gone." "How did he know where she would be?" Warren asked. Desmond wiped his eyes. "He told me Charles was setting up a meeting with her. He gave me the time, the route she would take, everything. He said to hit her car hard enough that it would look like an accident. He said to make sure I didn't stop, just keep driving." Warren's mind was racing. This wasn't just a conspiracy between Leonard and Desmond. Charles had been involved too, even if he hadn't explicitly asked for Kate to be killed. Charles had set up the meeting, knowing what Leonard was planning, or at the very least, suspecting it. Did Charles know what Leonard was planning? Warren asked. Desmond hesitated. "I don't know for sure. Leonard never said Charles asked him to do it, but Leonard kept saying he was protecting Charles, that Charles needed this problem to go away. It sounded like they had talked about it, Warren stood up. "Desmond Foster, you're under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy. You're going to be charged, and you're going to testify against Leonard Hayes. Do you understand?" Desmond nodded, his face pale. "Am I going to prison?" Warren didn't sugarize it. "Yes, for a long time. But if you cooperate, if you tell the truth in court, the DA might consider reducing your sentence." Warren left the interrogation room and immediately called his captain. "We need to move fast," Warren said. "We're going after Leonard Hayes, and we need to do this right. He's not going to go down easy." The captain agreed. Within hours, Warren had a team assembled. They obtained warrants for Leonard's phone records, bank statements, and emails. What they found was damning. Phone calls between Leonard and Desmond in the days leading up to the attack. A bank transfer of $15,000 from a church discretionary fund into Desmond's account. Emails where Leonard discussed handling the Kate problem with vague but incriminating language. Warren also pulled Charles Whitmore back in for questioning. This time, Charles wasn't calm. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. Warren sat down across from him and laid out what they knew. "Desmond Foster confessed," Warren said. "He told us Leonard Hayes paid him to kill Kate, and he said you set up the meeting that put her in the path of that SUV." Charles's face went white. "I didn't know," he said quickly. "I swear I didn't know Leonard was going to do that." Warren didn't believe him. "But you suspected, didn't you?" Charles looked away. "I told Leonard I was scared. I told him the divorce was going to ruin me, that people would ask questions. He said he would handle it. I thought he meant he'd talk to Kate, maybe convince her to delay the divorce or something. I didn't think he would try to kill her." "But you didn't stop him," Warren said. "You called Kate and set up the meeting. You gave Leonard exactly what he needed to make this happen." Charles's hands were shaking. "I didn't think he would actually do it. I thought he was just talking. People say things when they're upset. I didn't think he was serious." Warren leaned forward. "Kate Brandon is paralyzed. She will never walk again because of what you and Leonard did. You may not have driven that SUV, but you're just as responsible." Charles broke down, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen." Warren arrested Charles on charges of conspiracy and accessory to attempted murder. But even as Charles was being led away in handcuffs, Warren knew the hardest part was still ahead. Arresting Leonard Hayes wasn't going to be simple. Leonard was powerful, connected, and surrounded by people who would do anything to protect him. Warren went to the church the next day with a team of officers. They walked into Leonard's office during a staff meeting. Leonard looked up, surprised, but not alarmed. "Detective Cole," he said smoothly. "What can I do for you?" Warren held up the warrant. "Leonard Hayes, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." The room erupted. Staff members gasped. Some shouted in protest. Leonard stood up slowly, his face unreadable. "This is absurd," he said. "I'm a man of God. I would never harm anyone." Warren didn't argue. "You'll have your chance to defend yourself in court. Right now, you're coming with us." As Leonard was being handcuffed, he looked at Warren with something close to contempt. "You have no idea what you're doing," Leonard said quietly. "You're making a mistake." Warren met his gaze. "The only mistake was thinking you could get away with this." But as Warren led Leonard out of the church, past shocked congregation members and crying staff, he knew this was just the beginning. Leonard Hayes wasn't going to go down without a fight, and the fight was going to be ugly. The truth was, what most people didn't know was that Leonard's power extended far beyond the church. He had spent decades building relationships with politicians, judges, business people, and community leaders. He donated heavily to political campaigns. He sat on boards of charitable organizations. He was invited to city council meetings and consulted on community initiatives. Leonard Hayes wasn't just a pastor. He was a political force, and that made arresting him incredibly dangerous. Within hours of Leonard's arrest, his attorney showed up at the police station. His name was Anthony Ellison, one of the most expensive defense lawyers in Georgia. Anthony had a reputation for getting powerful people out of impossible situations. He walked into the station like he owned the place, demanded to see his client, and immediately began making noise about civil rights violations and wrongful arrest. Warren watched from behind the glass as Anthony sat with Leonard in the interrogation room. Leonard was calm now, almost serene. He wasn't acting like a man who had just been arrested for attempted murder. He was acting like a man who knew he had the resources to make this problem disappear. The next morning, Leonard's church held a press conference. Members of the congregation stood outside the police station with signs that read, "Free Pastor Hayes, and innocent until proven guilty." Local news cameras captured it all. A spokesperson for the church, Deacon Anthony Wright, stood at a podium and spoke to the crowd. "Pastor Leonard Hayes is a man of integrity and faith," Anthony said. "For over 30 years he has served this community with love and dedication. These charges are baseless, and we believe they are part of a coordinated attack on our church and our values. We stand with Pastor Hayes, and we will not rest until his name is cleared." The crowd cheered. Warren watched the news coverage from his desk and felt a knot of frustration in his chest. This wasn't going to be a straightforward case. Leonard had an army of people ready to defend him, and they were willing to fight dirty. The political pressure started almost immediately. Warren's captain called him into his office. "I just got off the phone with the mayor's office," the captain said. "They're asking questions about this case. They want to know if we're sure about the evidence." Warren bristled. "We have phone records, bank transfers, and a confession from Desmond Foster. The evidence is solid." The captain nodded. "I believe you. But you need to understand what you're up against. Leonard Hayes has friends in very high places. If this case falls apart, it's not just your career on the line. It's mine, too. So make sure everything is airtight." Warren left the office feeling the weight of what he was doing. He knew this case could destroy him if it went wrong. But he also knew Kate Brandon was lying in a hospital bed, paralyzed for life, because of what Leonard and Charles had done. He wasn't going to let them get away with it. Anthony Ellison filed a series of motions to suppress evidence. He argued that the search warrants were obtained improperly. He claimed Desmond's confession was coerced. He challenged the bank records, saying the transfer could have been for legitimate church business. Every motion was designed to delay the trial and weaken the prosecution's case. But Warren and the district attorney's office fought back. They brought in forensic accountants to trace the money. They found that the $15,000 came from a discretionary fund that Leonard controlled personally, and there was no documentation showing what it was supposed to be used for. They obtained phone records showing Leonard and Desmond had communicated repeatedly in the days before the attack, despite Leonard's claim that he barely knew Desmond. Then they found the emails. Buried in Leonard's personal email account were messages to another pastor, Reverend Calvin Moore, where Leonard discussed the Kate situation. In one email, Leonard wrote, "Charles is panicking. If this divorce goes through, it's going to open doors we can't close. I need to make sure she doesn't become a problem." In another email, sent 2 days before the attack, Leonard wrote, "It's being handled. Charles doesn't need to worry anymore." Warren brought these emails to the DA, and they knew they had him. Leonard could argue all he wanted about misunderstandings and taken out of context statements, but the emails painted a clear picture. Leonard had orchestrated Kate's attempted murder to protect Charles and the church. But even with this evidence, Leonard's legal team didn't back down. Anthony Ellison held another press conference, this time attacking the prosecution. "These emails are being twisted to fit a narrative," Anthony said. "Pastor Hayes was trying to counsel Charles through a difficult time. His words have been taken out of context by overzealous investigators who are more interested in taking down a prominent black pastor than in finding the truth." The accusations stung. Warren knew that race was going to become part of this case, whether he liked it or not. Leonard was a black pastor in a predominantly black church. The prosecution was led by a white DA. Anthony was already planting seeds of doubt, suggesting this was about more than just the facts. Warren had to stay focused. He continued building the case, interviewing more witnesses, gathering more evidence. He found 2 church members who had overheard Leonard and Charles arguing in Leonard's office weeks before the attack. One of them, a woman named Renee Hightower, said she heard Leonard tell Charles, "I'll take care of it. You just need to trust me." Another witness, a janitor named Bennett, said he saw Leonard hand Desmond an envelope in the church parking lot 3 days before the attack. Bennett didn't think much of it at the time, but when he heard about the arrest, he came forward. The case was getting stronger, but so was the opposition. Leonard's supporters organized rallies. They flooded social media with hashtags like. Some members of the congregation accused Kate of lying, saying she was trying to destroy a man of God to cover up her own sins. Sylvia and Harold Brandon received threatening phone calls. People from the church told them they were traitors for going to the police. Some said Kate had brought this on herself by marrying Charles in the first place. The harassment got so bad that Warren assigned a patrol car to sit outside their house. Through it all, Kate remained in the hospital, fighting to recover. She had undergone multiple surgeries, but the damage to her spine was permanent. Doctors told her she would need to use a wheelchair for the rest of her life. Kate processed this news with a quiet devastation. She had lost so much already. Her marriage, her trust, her faith. Now she had lost her ability to walk. But as Kate lay in that hospital bed, something inside her shifted. She wasn't going to let Leonard and Charles win. She wasn't going to let them silence her. She decided she would testify, no matter how hard it was. She would tell the world what they had done. Warren visited Kate in the hospital to prepare her for what was coming. "This is going to be brutal," he told her honestly. "Leonard's attorneys are going to attack you. They're going to try to make you look like the bad guy. Are you ready for that?" Kate looked at Warren with a strength that surprised him. "I'm ready," she said. "I'm not letting them get away with this." Before moving on, a quick thank you to everyone watching and supporting this channel. Your presence truly keeps it alive. This community continues to grow because of people who believe in real, meaningful storytelling. Becoming a channel member unlocks exclusive extras, behind-the-scenes content, and directly helps us bring more powerful true stories to light. Your support makes a real difference, and we'd love to know who's here. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. If you're still tuned in right now, write "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who's watching till the end. Don't forget to like this video too. Now, let's continue. Kate woke up from her third surgery, with her mother sitting beside her bed. Sylvia looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying. "How are you feeling, baby?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kate tried to move her legs. Nothing. She tried again. Still, nothing. The reality hit her all over again, and she closed her eyes. "I can't feel them," Kate said. Sylvia squeezed her hand. "I know. I'm so sorry." Kate opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling. "I'm never going to walk again, am I?" Sylvia couldn't lie to her. "The doctors said the damage is permanent. But you're alive, Kate. You survived. That's what matters." Kate didn't respond. Being alive didn't feel like enough right now. Her entire life had been destroyed in a matter of weeks. She had gone from being a newlywed with hopes for the future to a paralyzed woman who couldn't trust anyone or anything she had been taught to believe in. The next few weeks were a blur of physical therapy, pain management, and learning how to navigate life in a wheelchair. Kate struggled with every aspect of it. Simple things like getting dressed or moving from the bed to the chair felt impossible at first. She cried more times than she could count, but slowly, with the help of her therapists, she began to adapt. Her parents visited every day. Harold was quieter than usual, his face hard with anger he didn't know how to express. Sylvia tried to stay positive, but Kate could see the guilt in her mother's eyes. Sylvia blamed herself for pushing Kate into the marriage. She blamed herself for not listening when Kate said she had doubts. One afternoon, Kate looked at her mother and said, "This isn't your fault." Sylvia's face crumpled. "I should have listened to you. I should have told you to wait. I was so excited about you marrying a preacher that I didn't stop to think about whether he was the right man." Kate reached for her mother's hand. "You didn't know." None of us knew. But even as she said it, Kate wondered if that was true. Had there been signs? Had she ignored her instincts because everyone around her was so convinced this was God's will? While Kate was recovering, the legal case against Leonard, Charles, and Desmond moved forward. The district attorney, a woman named Patricia Reeves, reached out to Kate to discuss her testimony. Patricia came to the hospital and sat down beside Kate's bed. "I need you to understand what you're walking into," Patricia said. Leonard Hayes has one of the best defense attorneys in the state. He's going to do everything he can to discredit you. Kate nodded. I understand. Patricia continued. He's going to argue that you're lying to cover up your own mistakes. He's going to suggest that you knew about Charles's past and married him anyway. He's going to paint you as vindictive, as someone trying to destroy a man of God because your marriage didn't work out. Kate felt a surge of anger. None of that is true. Patricia gave her a sympathetic look. I know, but that doesn't mean it won't be effective. Juries are unpredictable. People want to believe in their pastors. They want to believe that men like Leonard Hayes are good, honest, faithful servants. The idea that a pastor could orchestrate a murder? That's hard for people to accept. Kate looked Patricia in the eye. I'll testify. I'll tell the truth. Whatever happens after that, happens. Patricia smiled slightly. Good. Because we need you. Your testimony is the key to this entire case. As the trial date approached, Kate's story started to attract media attention. News outlets picked up the case, and suddenly Kate's face was all over television and social media. Headlines screamed, "Bride paralyzed after honeymoon confession," and megachurch pastor accused in murder plot. The attention was overwhelming. Kate's phone was flooded with messages, some supportive, some cruel. Strangers sent her prayers and encouragement. Others sent hateful comments, accusing her of lying and trying to destroy the church. Some people from Cornerstone Faith Ministries started a smear campaign against her online, posting old photos of Kate and making up stories about her past. One post claimed Kate had been sleeping with multiple men before she married Charles, and that she was using the marriage to trap him. Another post said Kate had known about Charles's sexuality all along and had married him for money and status. None of it was true, but the lies spread anyway. Kate stopped reading the comments. She deactivated her social media accounts and focused on preparing for trial. Patricia helped her understand what questions she would be asked, how to stay calm under pressure, and how to handle attacks from the defense. But the emotional toll was heavy. Kate started having nightmares. She would wake up in the middle of the night, reliving the crash, feeling the impact over and over again. Her therapist told her this was normal, that trauma manifests in different ways, but knowing it was normal didn't make it easier. Then something unexpected happened. 3 other women reached out to Kate. Each of them had a similar story. They had been married to preachers who were closeted gay men. They had been used as cover, manipulated by church leaders who valued reputation over truth. And when they tried to leave, they had been pressured, threatened, and silenced. One woman, Simone Caldwell, had been married to a preacher named Terrell, who was part of Leonard's inner circle. She said Leonard had encouraged Terrell to marry her, even though Leonard knew Terrell was gay. When Simone found out and wanted a divorce, Leonard offered her money to stay quiet. Another woman, Vanessa Poole, said Leonard had propositioned her husband during a church retreat. When she confronted Leonard, he denied it and told the congregation that Vanessa was mentally unstable. She was pushed out of the church and shunned by people she had considered family. The third woman, Renee Hightower, said she had been married to a preacher who physically abused her. When she went to Leonard for help, he told her to submit to her husband and pray harder. He said divorce was a sin and that she needed to endure her suffering as a test of faith. These women had been silenced for years, but Kate's story gave them courage. They agreed to testify, to show that Leonard's behavior wasn't an isolated incident. He had a pattern of protecting abusive and deceptive men, all in the name of preserving the church's image. Patricia was thrilled. This changes everything, she said. This shows a pattern of behavior. This shows Leonard has been doing this for years. But it also meant the trial was going to be even more intense. Leonard's defense team would fight back hard, and the women who came forward would be attacked just like Kate. As Kate prepared to face Leonard in court, she thought about all the women who had been hurt by men like him. She thought about how the church, an institution that was supposed to protect and care for people, had instead become a place where predators thrived. And she made a decision. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every woman who had been silenced, manipulated, and abused by men who hid behind their titles and their faith. As the prosecution built its case, investigators started digging deeper into Leonard Hayes' history. What they found was a trail of victims that stretched back decades. Detective Warren Cole worked with a team of investigators to interview former church members, staff, and volunteers. Many people were hesitant to talk at first. Leonard still had loyal followers who would defend him no matter what. But as word spread about the charges against him, more people started coming forward. One of the first people Warren spoke to was a former associate pastor named Reverend Calvin Moore. Calvin had worked under Leonard for 15 years before leaving the church abruptly 5 years ago. When Warren asked why he left, Calvin was reluctant to answer. "I can't get involved in this," Calvin said. "I have a family. I have a new church. I don't want to be dragged into Leonard's mess." But Warren pressed him. "Kate Brandon is paralyzed because of what Leonard did. If you know something that can help us, you need to say it." Calvin sat in silence for a long time. Then he sighed. "Leonard runs that church like a crime family," he said. "If you're loyal to him, he takes care of you. But if you cross him, he destroys you." Warren leaned forward. "How does he destroy people?" Calvin explained that Leonard kept files on everyone: pastors, deacons, church members. If someone had a secret, Leonard knew about it. If someone made a mistake, Leonard documented it. And if that person ever became a problem, Leonard would use that information against them. "I saw him do it multiple times," Calvin said. "A deacon wanted to leave the church. Leonard threatened to tell his wife about an affair. A pastor questioned Leonard's financial practices. Leonard spread rumors that the pastor was stealing from the offering plate. People were terrified of him." Warren asked about Charles Whitmore. Calvin shook his head. Charles was Leonard's favorite. Leonard saw himself in Charles: ambitious, charismatic, good at manipulating people. But Charles had secrets, and Leonard used those secrets to control him. "Did Leonard know about Charles's sexuality?" Warren asked. Calvin nodded. "Of course he did. Leonard knew everything. And instead of encouraging Charles to get help, to deal with his trauma, Leonard told him to get married. Leonard said marriage would solve the problem, that it would protect Charles's reputation." Warren felt his anger rising. And when Kate threatened to divorce Charles, Leonard decided she had to be eliminated. Calvin looked down. "That sounds like Leonard. He's always been willing to do whatever it takes to protect the church's image. And Charles was too valuable to lose." Warren asked if Calvin would testify. Calvin hesitated. "If I testify, Leonard's people will come after me. They'll dig up every mistake I've ever made. They'll try to destroy my reputation." Warren was honest with him. "They probably will. But if you don't testify, Leonard might walk free, and he'll keep doing this to other people." Calvin eventually agreed. His testimony would be powerful. An insider who could explain how Leonard operated, how he controlled people, how he prioritized reputation over truth. But Calvin wasn't the only one with information. A woman named Brenda Rollins, who had worked as Leonard's administrative assistant for 10 years, came forward with documents. Brenda had kept copies of Leonard's personal files, including financial records that showed suspicious transactions. "I knew something wasn't right," Brenda said. "Leonard was moving money around in ways that didn't make sense. Donations that were supposed to go to missions or community programs were being funneled into accounts I couldn't track." The forensic accountants reviewed Brenda's documents and found evidence of embezzlement. Leonard had been siphoning money from the church for years, using it to pay off people, fund his lavish lifestyle, and cover up scandals. The $15,000 he paid Desmond to attack Kate was just one example. The more investigators dug, the worse it got. They found that Leonard had used church funds to pay for trips, expensive gifts, and even legal fees for pastors who got into trouble. He had covered up affairs, hidden financial mismanagement, and silenced anyone who questioned him. One particularly disturbing discovery involved a young man named Trevor Jackson. Trevor had been a teenager when he started volunteering at the church. Leonard had taken Trevor under his wing, mentoring him and giving him opportunities to serve in ministry. But according to Trevor's family, Leonard had also been inappropriate with him. Trevor's mother, Denise Jackson, told investigators that Trevor had come to her when he was 17 and said Leonard had touched him inappropriately during a counseling session. Denise confronted Leonard, but he denied it. He said Trevor was confused, that he had misunderstood a fatherly gesture. Leonard then threatened Denise. He told her that if she spread these accusations, he would make sure Trevor never got into college, never got a job, never had a future. Denise was terrified. She kept quiet, and Trevor suffered in silence. Trevor eventually left the church and cut off all contact with his family. Denise hadn't spoken to her son in years, and she blamed Leonard for destroying their relationship. Patricia Reeves, the district attorney, knew this information was explosive, but she also knew it was risky to bring up in court. The charges against Leonard were specific: conspiracy to commit murder. Bringing in allegations of sexual misconduct and embezzlement could confuse the jury or make it look like the prosecution was piling on. But Patricia also knew that establishing a pattern of behavior was crucial. If the jury understood that Leonard was willing to do anything to protect himself and the church, they would be more likely to believe he orchestrated Kate's attack. Patricia decided to include testimony from some of the victims, but she had to be strategic about it. She would focus on the women who had been manipulated and silenced, showing that Leonard had a history of protecting predatory pastors. She would include Calvin's testimony about how Leonard controlled people through fear, and she would present the financial evidence showing Leonard's willingness to use church funds for personal gain. Leonard's defense team fought back hard. Anthony Ellison filed motions to exclude most of this testimony, arguing it was prejudicial and irrelevant to the charges. The judge allowed some of it but excluded other parts. It was a partial victory for both sides. As the trial date approached, the media coverage intensified. National news outlets picked up the story. Documentaries were being pitched. True crime podcasts wanted interviews. Kate's story had touched a nerve, exposing the dark side of religious institutions that prioritize image over integrity. But for Kate, none of the attention mattered. She just wanted justice. She wanted Leonard, Charles, and Desmond to be held accountable for what they had done. And she wanted other women to know they didn't have to stay silent. The trial of Leonard Hayes, Charles Whitmore, and Desmond Foster began on a cold Monday morning in November. The courthouse was packed with reporters, church members, and curious onlookers. Security was tight. Protesters stood outside with signs, some supporting Leonard, others demanding justice for Kate. Kate arrived at the courthouse in a wheelchair, flanked by her parents. Cameras flashed as she was wheeled inside. She kept her head up, refusing to show fear or weakness. Inside the courtroom, she saw Leonard for the first time since his arrest. He looked thinner, older, but still composed. When their eyes met, Leonard didn't look away. There was no remorse in his expression, no acknowledgement of what he had done. Charles sat at the defense table next to his attorney. He looked broken, like a man who had lost everything. He wouldn't look at Kate. Desmond sat separately with his public defender. He looked terrified. The prosecution's opening statement was delivered by Patricia Reeves. She stood before the jury and laid out the case clearly. "This is a story about power, manipulation, and murder," Patricia began. "Reverend Leonard Hayes is a man who has spent decades building an empire. But that empire was built on lies, control, and fear." When Kate Brandon threatened to expose the truth about Charles Whitmore, Leonard decided she had to be silenced. He paid Desmond Foster $15,000 to kill her. And Charles Whitmore, the man Kate married, set her up by arranging a meeting that put her directly in the path of an attack. Kate survived, but she will never walk again. These three men are responsible for that. The defense's opening statement was delivered by Anthony Ellison. He was smooth, confident, and persuasive. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're going to hear in this trial is a tragic story, but it's not the story the prosecution wants you to believe. Leonard Hayes is not a murderer. He's a pastor who has dedicated his life to serving his community. Charles Whitmore is not a conspirator. He's a man who made mistakes, yes, but he never wanted anyone to get hurt. And Desmond Foster? He's a desperate man who made a terrible decision, but he acted alone. The prosecution wants you to believe this was some grand conspiracy, but the evidence will show otherwise." The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution called dozens of witnesses. Desmond Foster took the stand first. He testified about Leonard's phone calls, the meetings in Leonard's office, and the $15,000. He described how Leonard told him exactly where Kate would be and when to hit her. The defense tried to discredit Desmond, painting him as a criminal who would say anything to get a lighter sentence. But Desmond's testimony was corroborated by phone records, bank statements, and text messages. Kate took the stand next. The courtroom fell silent as she was wheeled to the witness box. Patricia asked her to describe the night she discovered Charles in the honeymoon suite. Kate spoke clearly, her voice steady despite the pain of reliving that moment. She described Charles's confession, his admission that the marriage was a lie, and her decision to file for divorce. Then Patricia asked about the phone call from Charles asking to meet at the restaurant. "Did you suspect anything was wrong?" Patricia asked. Kate shook her head. "No, I thought he wanted to apologize. I thought maybe we could end things peacefully." The defense's cross-examination was brutal. Anthony Ellison tried to suggest that Kate had known about Charles's past before the marriage. He implied that she was lying to make herself look like a victim. But Kate didn't break. She answered every question with honesty and strength. "Did you love Charles Whitmore?" Anthony asked. Kate looked at him. "I thought I did, but I didn't really know him. He made sure of that." The defense also called witnesses to testify about Leonard's character. Church members talked about his generosity, his dedication, his years of service. But the prosecution countered with testimony from Simone, Vanessa, and Renee, the 3 women who had been manipulated and silenced by Leonard. Their stories were heartbreaking. Each woman described how Leonard had prioritized the church's reputation over their safety and well-being. The jury listened intently. Some jurors had tears in their eyes. Calvin Moore's testimony was also powerful. He explained how Leonard controlled people through fear and manipulation. He described the culture of secrecy and intimidation that Leonard had created. By the time Calvin finished, the jury had a clear picture of who Leonard really was. The financial evidence was presented next. Forensic accountants testified about the $15,000 transfer and the pattern of suspicious transactions. They showed how Leonard had used church funds for personal purposes, including paying off people who threatened to expose scandals. Charles Whitmore took the stand in his own defense. He admitted to lying about the proposal, admitted to deceiving Kate, but insisted he never wanted her to be hurt. "I told Leonard I was scared," Charles said. "I told him the divorce was going to ruin me, but I never asked him to hurt Kate. I never wanted this to happen." The prosecution's cross-examination was devastating. Patricia walked Charles through the timeline: the phone call to Leonard after Kate filed for divorce, the subsequent call to Kate to set up the meeting, and the attack that happened hours later. "You knew what Leonard was planning, didn't you?" Patricia asked. Charles hesitated. "I suspected he might do something, but I didn't know what." "And you didn't stop him," Patricia said. "You didn't warn Kate. You didn't call the police. You just let it happen." Charles broke down crying. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Leonard Hayes refused to testify. His attorney advised him to plead the Fifth, which was his right. But his silence spoke volumes. The jury noticed. Closing arguments were powerful on both sides. Patricia reminded the jury of the evidence, the phone calls, the money, the testimony, the timeline. "These 3 men conspired to silence Kate Brandon," she said. "They failed to kill her, but they destroyed her life. They must be held accountable." Anthony Ellison argued that the prosecution hadn't proven conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt. "Desmond Foster acted alone," he said. "Leonard Hayes may have said things in anger, but words are not crimes. Charles Whitmore made mistakes, but he's not a murderer." The jury deliberated for 3 days. During that time, Kate waited at home with her parents. She tried not to think about what would happen if the jury came back with a not guilty verdict. She tried to trust that justice would prevail. On the 3rd day, the jury reached a verdict. Kate was wheeled back into the courtroom. The judge asked the jury foreperson to read the verdicts. In the case of Desmond Foster, On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty. Kate closed her eyes and exhaled. In the case of Charles Whitmore, on the charges of conspiracy and accessory to attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty. Kate's mother grabbed her hand and squeezed. In the case of Leonard Hayes, on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered. Others cried. Leonard's supporters shouted in protest. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Desmond Foster was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Charles Whitmore was sentenced to 20 years. Leonard Hayes was sentenced to 30 years. Leonard showed no emotion as the sentence was read. He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, his head held high. Charles wept openly. Desmond looked relieved that it was finally over. Kate watched them being led away and felt a strange mix of emotions. Justice had been served, but it didn't bring her legs back. It didn't erase the trauma. It didn't undo the damage, but it was something. It was accountability. It was proof that powerful men couldn't get away with destroying lives just to protect their reputations. In the months following the trial, Kate's life began to change in ways she didn't expect. She moved to North Carolina, away from Atlanta, and the memories that haunted her. She started physical therapy and learned to live her new reality. It was hard, some days were unbearable, but she kept going. Kate also started speaking out. She gave interviews, telling her story to anyone who would listen. She also wrote a book. The book became a bestseller, and Kate used the platform to advocate for survivors of abuse and manipulation. She started a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women recognize the signs of spiritual manipulation and control. She spoke at churches, conferences, and universities, warning people about the dangers of blindly trusting leaders just because they hold religious titles. Kate's story inspired thousands of women to come forward with their own experiences. Some had been manipulated into marriages. Others had been abused by church leaders and told to stay silent. Kate gave them a voice. Charles Whitmore served 5 years before being released on parole for good behavior. He changed his name to Carl Winston and moved to a small town in Alabama. He didn't return to ministry. He didn't speak publicly. He worked at a warehouse, living quietly and trying to rebuild a life that no longer existed. Some people said Charles deserved a second chance, that he had been manipulated by Leonard just like Kate. Others said he was just as guilty and should have served his full sentence. Kate didn't have an opinion either way. She had moved on. Leonard Hayes remained in prison. He refused all interview requests. He refused to speak to reporters or documentarians. Fellow inmates said he still called himself Pastor Hayes and tried to lead Bible studies, but no one participated. His church, Cornerstone Faith Ministries, collapsed within a year of his conviction. The congregation dwindled. Donations dried up. The building was sold and converted into a community center. Desmond Foster wrote letters to Kate from prison, begging for forgiveness. Kate never responded. She didn't owe him anything. Kate's parents struggled with guilt for years. Sylvia blamed herself for pushing Kate into the marriage. Harold blamed himself for not protecting his daughter. But Kate told them over and over that it wasn't their fault. They had been manipulated too, just like everyone else. The case raised important questions about accountability in religious institutions. How many other churches were protecting predators? How many other leaders were using their power to manipulate and control? How many other victims were being silenced? Kate didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing. Silence was the enemy. As long as people stayed quiet, as long as they prioritized reputation over truth, the abuse would continue. Kate's story became a rallying cry for reform. Churches started implementing policies to protect vulnerable members. Seminaries began teaching about spiritual abuse and manipulation. Survivors found courage to speak up. But the work was far from over. There were still churches where abusers thrived. There were still leaders who valued image over integrity. There were still women being told to submit, to stay silent, to endure. Kate knew she couldn't change everything, but she could change something, and that was enough. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes, if it made you think, do something with it. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more investigations that expose the truth behind closed doors. And drop a comment below. Do you think churches do enough to protect victims, or do they protect predators? Let's have that conversation. Because some truths are too important to stay buried, and some stories need to be told, no matter how uncomfortable they make us. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough to stay till the end. We'll see you in the next investigation.